Okay, so there was this Supreme Court decision recently,
Yeah.
and it had to do with abortions.
Yeah.
Specifically, like those really borderline cases,
Yeah.
where a fetus might be viable, like
Yeah.
right on that edge of 24 to 30 weeks.
Right on that edge.
And it really, through this whole question of reproductive rights,
Huge issue, yeah.
right back into the spotlight.
Back in the spotlight?
In India.
Yeah, and I think this judgment, even beyond just the immediate case,
Yeah.
it has so many, ripple effects and implications.
Impact, yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to do today,
Absolutely. We're going to dig deep.
Let's dig deep.
This isn't just about a headline.
Right.
This is about, decades of legal back and forth and, the very real challenges that women face trying to get safe abortions.
Exactly.
And I think it raises some really big questions about how we move forward.
Yeah, the path forward.
Exactly.
Huge questions.
Especially for you listening, if you're preparing for those UPSC exams,
Yeah, those big exams.
you have to get this.
You got to know this stuff.
This is a core socio-legal issue.
Right.
So our mission today is to break it all down for you.
Break it down.
The laws,
Yes.
the barriers,
The reality.
the solutions.
The whole thing.
We're going to use legal frameworks and expert analysis.
So some real in-depth stuff.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the Hindu. They've got some great coverage of this.
Perfect. All right. So to really grasp where we are now,
Okay.
let's rewind the clock a bit. Back in time.
Yeah.
What was the situation before 1971?
Way back.
Way back.
Before 71, it was really restrictive.
Okay.
Basically, abortion was a crime.
Wow.
It fell under sections 312 and 313 of the Indian Penal Code.
The IPC.
The IPC, yeah. And what that meant was that if you intentionally caused a miscarriage, it was a crime.
Crime.
Unless it was to save the mother's life.
That was the only exception.
That was basically it.
So you can imagine how many women
Oh, it's a terrible story.
were forced into these really unsafe
Unsafe methods,
yeah.
devastating for their health.
Devastating.
Tragically, maternal mortality rates were sky high.
So high.
I mean, there were studies at the time that linked a huge percentage of maternal deaths
Just to unsafe abortion.
directly to unsafe abortions. So it was clear something had to change.
It was a crisis.
A real public health crisis, yeah.
So what was the turning point?
Yeah, what changed things?
Yeah.
Well, people started to realize how bad the situation was,
Mhm.
how these restrictive laws were causing real harm.
Right.
And that's where the Shanti Lal Shah Committee came in,
Okay.
formed in 1966.
Yeah.
They had this crucial mission
Big job.
to look into the legal framework and the rise in unsafe abortions and all these deaths.
It was a huge problem.
It was, and their findings were really powerful.
Really powerful.
They said, we need to broaden the legal grounds for abortion
Okay.
to protect women.
Yeah, to protect women's health.
Exactly.
So their recommendations,
Laid the groundwork for the MTP Act
the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act.
of 1971,
Okay, so that brings us to the MTP Act,
the big one.
which we hear about all the time.
Yeah.
So break it down for us.
Okay.
What are the key parts, especially with those 2021 amendments?
Right. So 1971, that was a big turning point.
A huge moment.
It moved away from that criminal framework,
Yeah.
and it set up a system for when a pregnancy could be ended legally.
Okay.
Initially, it allowed for abortions up to 20 weeks
Okay.
under certain conditions, mostly focused on the mother's health in cases of rape.
Right. Yeah.
Then the 2021 amendments came along.
But more recently.
Yeah, and they extended those limits.
Extended them.
Yeah, now up to 20 weeks, you need one registered medical practitioner,
One RMP.
one RMP to sign off on it.
Okay.
Between 20 and 24 weeks, you need two
Okay, two RMPs.
RMPs.
Okay.
And then after 24 weeks, things get a lot more serious.
Okay.
You need a whole state-level medical board
Now, whole board.
to evaluate whether the abortion is allowed.
So that's pretty strict.
It is, they only approve it in very specific cases.
Like what kind of cases?
Like if there are serious problems with the fetus.
Problems with the fetus.
Yeah, problems that mean it couldn't survive.
Like incompatible with life.
Exactly. Or if the mother's health is at serious risk.
Either physical or mental health.
That's right, both physical and mental.
Okay, so there's a lot more scrutiny later in the pregnancy.
Definitely.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita.
Yeah, that's an important one.
What's the connection to the MTP Act?
It's like the other side of the coin.
Okay.
The MTP Act says when abortion is allowed,
Okay.
but the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, it's the new version of the IPC.
Okay. The updated one?
The updated one, and it says that abortion is still a crime.
if it's not under the MTP Act.
Exactly.
So it's like a safety zone.
That's a good way to put it. The MTP Act is the safe zone.
Okay, I see.
And anything outside that zone is still potentially illegal.
Potentially a crime.
Yeah. And I think for UPSC aspirants, it's important to understand
This is important.
that this shows how the law is still evolving.
It's not a finished story.
Not at all.
Okay, so the law sets the framework,
Yeah.
but the courts have also weighed in on this.
Oh, they've played a huge role.
They have.
They've really shaped how we think about abortion rights.
So what are some of those big court cases?
Well, there's the big one from 2017, Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India.
That's a landmark case.
It really is. In that case, the Supreme Court said that privacy is a fundamental right.
Under Article 21?
Article 21 of the Constitution. And they said that a woman's reproductive choices,
Those are part of her privacy.
absolutely, they're a part of her personal liberty and her privacy.
So that was huge.
It was a huge win for reproductive rights.
Okay.
And then there's a more recent ruling that built on that.
Okay, even more recent.
Yeah, this one focused on unmarried women.
Unmarried women.
Yeah, the court said that unmarried women who are between 20 and 24 weeks pregnant, they have the same right to an abortion as married women.
So their marital status doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. They have the same rights to autonomy, to dignity, to privacy.
So that was a big step towards equality.
And a huge step.
Okay, so legally, things have moved forward.
Yeah, definitely.
But we know that the reality for women on the ground,
The reality is different.
it can be so different.
It can be, yeah.
So what are some of those obstacles
What are those barriers?
that women are still facing
Yeah, so many barriers.
when they try to get an abortion?
Trying to access safe abortion services.
In India,
It's tough.
it is so tough.
One thing is state-level policies.
Oh, yeah. Different states have different rules.
They do, and sometimes those rules create problems.
Problems.
Like in Haryana,
Okay.
they have this policy of mandatory pregnancy registration.
Mandatory.
Yeah, every pregnancy has to be registered.
So everyone knows,
Yeah, and that goes against Section 5A of the MTP Act.
which guarantees confidentiality.
Exactly.
So it's like they're undermining the law,
They are, and that creates fear.
fear, and stigma
Exactly. Women are afraid that their pregnancy will be tracked.
that people will judge them.
Yeah, they'll be judged and scrutinized, and that can drive them towards unsafe abortions.
Because they're afraid.
they're afraid.
So that's one example of how policy can really hurt.
Really hurt people.
Okay, so what about choice?
What about choice?
Yeah. Is abortion on demand in India?
Not really.
Not really.
I mean, in some countries,
yeah.
a woman can choose to end a pregnancy within certain time limits.
Without having to meet conditions.
Yeah, without conditions. It's her, right?
Right.
But in India, it's different.
Different.
It's only allowed under those specific circumstances.
Laid out in the MTP Act.
Right, and you need those medical approvals.
So it's conditional.
It's conditional.
And that really highlights how we're still debating
There's a big debate.
how much autonomy a woman has.
How much control she has over her own body
Right.
versus, other considerations. It's a big question.
Okay. And this brings us to fetal viability.
Yeah, viability.
That's a word we hear a lot.
Especially with later term abortions.
Especially then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it actually mean?
What does it mean?
And how does it fit into all this?
It's complicated.
It is.
So medically, it's the point when a fetus
Can survive outside the womb.
can survive on its own.
Okay.
And generally, that's thought to be around 24 weeks.
24 weeks.
But it's not a hard and fast rule.
It varies.
It depends on things like how good the medical care is.
Access to NICUs.
Exactly, things like NICUs.
Neonatal intensive care units.
Exactly.
And also the health of the mother and the fetus.
All of that plays a role.
So it's complex.
It's very complex.
And what's really interesting is that medical advancements,
What's changing things?
they're pushing the boundary
Pushing the boundaries, yeah.
of when a baby can survive.
Exactly. So what does that mean for abortion laws?
Big question.
Huge question. And this is where the courts have a tough job.
A balancing act.
They have to balance a woman's right to choose.
Her autonomy.
Her autonomy.
With this idea of potential life.
Potential life. Yeah. And it's especially tricky in those later weeks.
24 to 30 weeks.
Right in that zone. And I think there's a real concern.
What's the concern?
That sometimes in these discussions,
Yeah.
the woman's mental and emotional well-being
Get lost.
get overlooked.
Yeah.
It's a real problem.
So even beyond the concept of viability,
Okay.
what are some of the practical challenges?
What are the roadblocks?
The roadblocks that women face.
Yeah.
Especially later in pregnancy.
Especially later. Yeah.
They're trying to get an abortion.
Well, one big thing is the delays.
Delays.
Yeah, for abortions after 24 weeks.
Yeah.
You need that medical board approval.
The state-level board.
Right, and they look at each case individually.
Individually.
So it takes time.
It takes time.
And what's worse, there aren't really standardized protocols for these boards.
So it's not consistent.
It's not consistent.
Across the country.
And that means you can get subjective decisions.
Based on someone's personal beliefs?
Yeah, like their beliefs about fetal life.
Right.
And sometimes that overshadows the medical evidence.
And the woman's needs.
And the woman's needs, exactly. And those delays,
They're dangerous.
they can push the pregnancy past the legal limit.
So then what happens?
Then the woman has very few options.
Very few options.
It's incredibly stressful and harmful.
It's a terrible situation.
It is.
So are there other systemic issues
Oh, yeah.
in the healthcare system
Absolutely.
that contribute to this?
There are.
What are they?
Well, one of the biggest is the shortage of specialists.
Not enough doctors?
Not enough doctors. Yeah, the MTP Act says that abortions have to be done by gynecologists or
Right.
obstetricians.
Okay, specialists.
Specialists. But the problem is there's a huge shortage of these doctors,
Especially in rural areas
especially in rural areas.
where most of the population lives.
Right, and according to the 2019-20 rural health statistics,
Okay, the official number.
the official numbers, they're missing about 70% of the specialists they need.
70%.
70%, that's a huge gap.
It's massive.
And on top of that,
It gets worse.
there aren't enough NICUs.
Not enough neonatal intensive care units.
Exactly, and that's a problem even if a woman doesn't want an abortion.
Right.
Because if there are complications
Late in pregnancy.
late in pregnancy, they might need an NICU.
To care for the baby.
Yeah, and if there's no NICU nearby,
It's a huge risk.
it's a huge risk.
So even if a woman has the legal right,
even if it's legal,
if there are no doctors,
if there's no access to care,
it's meaningless.
it's meaningless.
Right. It's like the right doesn't even exist.
It's like it's not there.
Okay, and then there's this whole other layer,
What's that?
which you call legal apprehension.
Legal apprehension, yeah.
It's like this fear among doctors
Fear among doctors.
and
Hospitals, too.
about legal repercussions,
They're afraid of getting in trouble,
even if the abortion is legal.
even if it's legal. Yeah, because they see abortion as this exception,
Is this special case,
not a normal part of healthcare.
not a standard procedure.
Right. And so they're hesitant.
Hesitant to provide the service.
Yeah. Even when they're allowed to.
And we've even heard reports
Oh, yeah.
of hospitals requiring unmarried women
Unmarried women specifically.
to report to the police
To the police,
if they want an abortion.
which is completely illegal.
There's no basis for that.
No basis at all.
It's just intimidation.
Pure intimidation.
So it's clear that the law is one thing,
Yeah.
but the reality for women
Reality is different.
is so different.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally there's the societal aspect,
The stigma.
the stigma.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's huge.
It is.
How does that affect things?
Well, it creates this huge barrier.
A barrier to care,
Yeah, women who are seeking abortions, especially later in pregnancy,
especially later.
they face judgment.
That
They
get-
get asked these intrusive, insensitive questions
From doctors, from family members, from society.
from everyone, and that there's just a lack of empathy.
Lack of understanding.
Yeah, and this is even worse for women who are already marginalized.
Like who?
Unmarried women,
Wow.
minors,
Okay.
widows.
Right.
They face even more scrutiny.
Even more judgment.
And it's not just the judgment itself.
It's the fear
It's the fear of being ostracized,
of being rejected.
rejected by your community, your family.
Right.
And that can be so isolating.
So isolating.
It can make women afraid to seek help,
Yeah.
afraid to get the care they need.
So it's a complex web of challenges
It is.
that women are facing.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead,
Looking ahead,
what are some ways to improve this?
how can we make things better?
Yeah, how can we improve access
To safe abortion care.
to safe abortion care
Yeah,
for all women in India?
that's the goal.
Yeah,
Well, I think a big part of it is a shift in mindset.
a mindset shift.
Yeah, we need to start seeing abortion as a health care, right?
Not a crime,
Not a crime, not a special case.
but a normal part of healthcare.
Within those legal limits, of course.
Right.
But it's a woman's right to make decisions about her own body,
Her autonomy.
her autonomy. Yeah, and that would be a huge step forward
A huge step.
for women's health.
Okay, and then we need to strengthen those privacy protections.
Privacy is key.
Yeah, get rid of policies like mandatory pregnancy registration
Absolutely.
and really enforce that confidentiality rule.
Section 5A, the MTP Act,
Yeah.
that's got to be enforced everywhere.
Okay, so those are like the big picture changes.
Yeah, the foundational stuff.
The foundation.
Yeah.
But what about practical steps?
Practical steps.
On the ground.
Yeah, well, one thing is making those medical abortion pills.
The MTP pills.
The MTP pills, yeah. They need to be available everywhere.
Pharmacies, health centers.
Everywhere. And there needs to be good regulation.
To make sure they're safe.
To make sure they're safe, yeah.
Okay. And then we need more trained providers.
More doctors.
Nurses.
Yeah, anyone who can safely provide abortions.
Especially those early stage MTPs.
Especially those early ones.
Yeah.
And we need to invest in rural health care.
More hospitals, more clinics.
More of everything.
Especially in those areas where there are shortages.
Yeah, and we need more NICUs, too.
To handle complications.
To handle complications, yeah.
Okay, and then finally, education.
Education is huge.
Comprehensive sex education.
That's right.
No stigma, no shame.
Just facts.
Facts about contraception.
Contraception, yeah.
Abortion.
So people can make informed decisions.
Informed decision.
About their bodies, about their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We started with that Supreme Court decision.
The big one.
The big one.
About later term abortion.
Yeah, and all the complexities around that.
All the layers.
We looked at the history, the laws, the barriers.
The whole picture.
The reality for women.
On the ground.
And the potential solutions.
What can we do?
What can we do? And it's clear that this is not a simple issue.
Not at all.
It affects so many things.
It affects everything.
Individual rights.
Public health.
Social justice.
Everything.
And for you listening.
Especially if you're studying for the UPSC exam.
You need to understand this.
This is a crucial socio-legal issue.
It really is.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the law.
It's about people.
It's about people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap things up.
To wrap it up.
I'm going to leave you with a question.
A question to think about.
Yeah, we've talked about how far we've come.
In terms of reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And we've talked about all the progress in neonatal care.
Saving babies earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
So the question is.
How do we move forward?
As a country.
In a way that respects women's autonomy.
Their right to choose.
Their right to choose.
But also acknowledges that potential life.
That potential life.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance.
It's a tough one.
But it's a conversation we need to have.
We need to keep talking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we hope this deep dive
into this complex issue
has given you some clarity.
Some food for thought.
Some new perspectives.
Yeah.
And if you found it helpful,
especially for your UPSC prep,
please subscribe to our channel.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
And leave a comment with any questions or thoughts.
We love hearing from you.
We do.
Yeah.
And for those of you who want to dig deeper,
go to the source.
Our main source for this episode was The Hindu.
They've got some great reporting on this.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back soon with another important discussion.
We'll see you then.
See you then.
Bye.